We are glad to see people joining in. If you would like to include your name and organization in the chat or name and where you're located, we'd be happy to see. Um, also, for folks who are interested in having their camera on, we totally welcome seeing your responses, especially facial reactions can be really helpful as our presenter has an opportunity to kind of watch to see if she needs to explain further or meets the mark. So it's good to see you all. Good to see your all's faces. And again, if you're just joining us, feel free to put your name, organization, or county in the chat. Looks like we've got folks from all over the place. I see our Bowling Green friends and friends from Paintsville and Louisville and quite a few places, Northern Kentucky. Are we going to get every region of the state? Maybe. Campbell County, fantastic. Well, we really appreciate you all joining us today. I think we are going to learn a lot from our expert presenter, and we're really looking forward to sharing information with you that we think will be important as you move back into your communities and work with the individuals and families that you work with. This is one of our first events for Child Abuse Prevention Month. And really, again, glad to have you all here. So as we allow folks to continue to get connected, I will jump in with just a couple of housekeeping items, and then we can get things started and hear from Kiera and Joy. So I'm Shannon Moody with Kentucky Youth Advocates. We are host and home to the Coast Air for Kids Face It movement, which is a child abuse prevention movement that is partnered. We've got partners from all across the state of Kentucky, and we're glad to see many of those folks who have joined today. For the presentation today and for the training, we will have a couple of things to keep in mind. So the first is if you could please stay on mute while Joy is presenting, we'd really appreciate it. We also have the ability to mute you if you are struggling with that, but please stay on mute until you are prompted to go off of mute. If you do have any questions, you can drop them in the chat especially during the Q&A session, or if you've just got a burning question that you need the response to, drop it in the chat as it comes to mind and we will visit that. We will have an evaluation survey at the end of this training, and you will be able to request your social work CEUs or certificate of completion at the end of the survey. So as you complete the survey, there will be that section to include the request for those CEUs or certificates. And the survey is required to receive your certificate. We will drop the link for the survey at the end of the training in the chat. We will not be sending it as a follow-up. This just helps us to ensure that folks are joining and participating in the survey and earning their continuing education credits. So again, thank you all so much for being here. We're really excited about the content that Joy will be sharing. And we are first going to start the conversation by handing it over to Miss Kiera Dunk, who is a fierce advocate around making sure that people understand the link between animal abuse and child abuse. And she has been championing some legislation as well as just on the media side of things, making sure that folks are aware of this link and what people can be aware of in order to prevent child abuse and neglect. So Kiera, I'm going to pass it over to you.
Thank you, Shannon. So as you know, I'm Kia. The bill I have been working on for the past 2 years, sadly, it did not pass this year, even though it was very close to. It requires animal control officers to take training on how to spot signs of child abuse and neglect. Because through my research, I found out about the link, which from stats here showed there is an 88% correlation between animal abuse and child abuse. So after finding out about that and meeting Joy, he told me the story of Keon, which was a very tragic case of child abuse where his mom killed him that could have been prevented because animal control had been to their house over 24 times before he was killed. So I wrote this legislation hoping to help other kids in the same situation before it was too late. Which is why even though the bill did not pass, I am so honored to be here and be able to see how many of you are interested in taking this training. Well, with that, I'll hand it off to Joy.
Thanks, Kiera. Can you bring up the presentation, please? Okay, my name is Joy Keeley. I'm a law enforcement officer in the state of Kentucky. I've been in law enforcement for about 45 years. So when I was a crimes against children's unit detective, I saw the link between animal abuse and crimes against people. I used to investigate child abuse, domestic violence, and sex crimes against both children and adults. And I saw this link. So when I retired the first time, which we all do, I decided I'm going to bust this wide open and get it known, et cetera. Well, come to find out, the whole nation, the globe knew about it. I mean, there's been global research done on this. It's just Kentucky didn't know about it. So that's when I decided to devote my efforts to training and educating across the state of Kentucky, helping to get bills passed like Keon's law that Kiera is sponsoring, and just try to get the word out for cross training, et cetera, so we can all work towards a common goal, which is protecting the vulnerable in our state. So with that, I'll go to the first slide. The Kentucky examples that I'm going to give were obtained through open records requests and are part of a study I'm doing on animal abuse in the state of Kentucky. If you want more on the information on this, I suggest you go to the National Link Coalition. It's a wonderful site for bills, for studies, for any information you want to know about this link is on that website. So I highly recommend it. And my first slide, I have a master's degree in emergency management, and I can, with this bad weather coming in, this is particularly pertinent. And during Hurricane Katrina, approximately 60,000 pets were left to die because no accommodations were made to co-shelter or shelter these animals. So the federal government passed 2 laws requiring all municipalities, state, local, et cetera, to have in their plans what to do with companion animals in the state of emergencies. And I can tell you in Kentucky, the only county I know of with specific plans for pets is Fayette. So make your own plans for your pets for the next few days and into the future, because you're probably not going to get a lot of help on the state or local level. The next slide, please. Pets and animals are so connected. I mean, pets and people are so connected that you really can't separate them. We have therapy animals, for example, in many of our court systems, our nursing homes, assisted living, schools, you name it. We've got pets in there, for all the way from hamsters up to animals, even horses I've seen. So they're used throughout the United States for therapy. Next slide, please. They're also used as for service animals, from people with that need help, from emotional support, physical support, in the military, police, etc. But mostly what animals provide is unconditional love. Next slide, please. One of the things that I always stress when I teach is, and everybody on here, I'm sure, is aware of this, is that nothing about humans is linear. So you can't say if there's a neglected dog outside, there's going to be neglect going inside. There may not be any abuse going on inside. Okay, there could be physical abuse going on inside and animal neglect going on outside. It could be a multiple range of different forms of abuse, or no abuse against people, but it should be considered a red flag. One of the things that for example, on this abuser on the side, on the left-hand side of your slides, that was a case that happened in Kentucky where he was living in a trailer with a senior citizen who was a family friend. She couldn't get out of bed. She had no food, no water, no access to the restroom, etc. When the police got there, the place was a mess. She had been neglected. He was bringing his children into that environment, which was endangering the welfare of a minor. And he had broken the legs of 3 of his 6 dogs by kicking them. There is another example in Kentucky where there could be a bite report, an animal bite report, because animals fight back. So you might have domestic violence showing that with physical abuse of the animal, which is causing emotional abuse of the child in the house, and the animal might be protecting the people with a bite report. There was an example here at the bottom. This was a personal case that I had where there was a child who brought, as a high schooler, who brought to school a video of him torturing a possum to death. It took over an hour for that possum to die. It was caught in a live trap. He was shooting it with a pellet gun. And they called me to the scene. I went. First thing I said is, "What else do you know?" And the assistant principal said, "Well, the mom came and she wanted to see the video. So we showed the video. And the first thing she said was, 'He's hurting me too.'" And so I went to the mom and I said, "What else do you know?" "Well, it's my understanding that he's had some dating violence issues where he's, some girls have been complaining that he's violent with them." By the end of the day, I asked everybody, "What else do you know about this person?" By the end of the day, I had domestic violence, I had dating violence, I had rape of a student, I had sexual assault of another student, and I had multiple threats made via text to other girls in the school. So that's the whole point of all this training is to not limit yourself to what the call for service is, but to expand that call for service to see if anybody else may be being abused so you can help save another life. Next slide, please. This is a study that was done that showed that 82% of animal abusers commit other crimes. The 3 most frequent crimes, as you can see, are intimate partner abuse, assault, whether it's stranger or it's non-domestic assault, basically is what it is, and child and elder abuse. Understand that 60% of families under investigation for any form of child abuse also reports animal abuse. In fact, there are more children living with animals in the household than there are with fathers in the household in the United States now. So this jumps, as Kiera said, to 88% when the child abuse is physical. So you could definitely, you've got an animal in the house, you've got a child being physically abused, you've got an 88% chance that the animal in the house may also be being abused at the same time. The next ones are drugs, weapons, gambling, gang-related activity. You see a lot with dog fighting and cockfighting. Kentucky is a cockfighting nexus now, so we're seeing a lot of that in the state. In my study, the interpersonal violence co-occurring with animal abuse are in order of frequency, which is assault 4th all the way up to murder. You have wanton endangerment, you have endangering the welfare of a minor, unlawful imprisonment, criminal mischief, strangulation, burglary, etc. As far as the animal fighting goes, that can be combined with domestic violence and child abuse. We had a case in Henry County where a girl stated that she had recorded her stepdad abusing her mother and threatening her and her mother. She also stated he engaged in cockfighting and had her help him train the cocks. A search warrant found marijuana, guns, $50,000 in cash, and drug paraphernalia, along with cocks and cockfighting paraphernalia. In 2019, in Kentucky, 4 murders were associated with animal abuse. 3 of them were interpersonal in nature, and 1 was one stranger. But you have also seen it in regards to terrorism. There was a case in New Jersey, Cape May, New Jersey, where in 2018, where a person has didn't threaten, he actually tried to kill his dog. And the family members called the police. The police got there. They found the dog hiding underneath the man's bed with a long laceration down its back where he tried to kill it. He had been radicalized by a sect that believed that dogs were filthy. So he was trying to show his devotion to that sect by killing his dog. They also found a pipe bomb underneath, a pressure cooker bomb underneath the bed where he was going to set it off in Times Square after he killed his mother. So it's also associated with terrorism as well. Next slide, please. This is where the Homeland Security has, and you see in the bottom left-hand corner, they are now, there are alarming acts of aggression. This is for targeted violence, behavioral approach to violence prevention towards targeted violence, such as your school shootings, your serial killers, etc. And where they are showing that there is a link between animal abuse, domestic violence, and targeted violence across our nation in their studies. So this is also a link. This is actually many links down the road. I mean, there's multiple links. But next slide, please. So this is the second link. The abuse of humans and animals are manifestations of the same underlying violent controlling behaviors, such as power and control. When I was investigating domestic violence, that's all we learned about in training. It's all about power and control, but it's also about preying on the vulnerable, children, battered adults, senior citizens, disabled, animals. But the lack of empathy is what's closely linked to all forms of abuse. This is why I would like to see more court order restrictions on animal ownerships for all types of animal abuse cases, because it's all about preying on the vulnerable. And all of these are members of our society are considered vulnerable. Next slide, please. This is the third link. The underlying conditions that create opportunity for animal cruelty to occur are stress, deprivation, aggression, mental illness, prior victimization, and drug and alcohol abuse. When I was Crimes Against Children unit detective, when I got a case of an older child sexually abusing a younger child, I knew at that point I had two cases, not just one, but two, because that older child had probably been sexually victimized as well. When I was in domestic violence, almost all my cases of domestic abuse occurred when drugs and alcohol were being used, if not abused, by one or more parties. But these risk factors for animal cruelty mirror the same risk factors for interpersonal violence. In my study of animal abuse and in my experience investigating interpersonal crimes, substance abuse is closely linked to all forms of abuse. Next slide, please. This is the next section is on neglect. Next slide, please. This is the fourth link. These are the commonalities of neglect between victims. You have children, disabled adults, animals. You got poor grooming across the board, malnourishment across the board, filthy living conditions, lack of medical care, left alone, abandoned, left in a hot car. All I'm trying to get with this slide is to show you that this is another link that we're showing the commonalities of neglect are all the same across the board. Most of the child abuse associated with animal abuse in my study is neglect of both. In fact, most abuse cases, period, as you all know, involving children involve neglect in the same way with animals. There was an example in Warren County where the Glasgow Police Department went with Child Protective Service to a home where they found unfit for humans due to dog feces, roaches, and filth. Another one in Warren County, Child Protective Service contacted law enforcement to report they had taken children out of the home due to neglect, and while there, they found 3 dogs confined without access to food or water. Franklin County, officer conducted a welfare check on a 2.5-year-old child, found him barefoot, wearing nothing but a diaper. The apartment was filthy, it was filled with trash. Flies were everywhere. The toilet was not working. It was packed with fecal material, and a young, emaciated dog was found dead in a crate in the living room, and that dog had been dead for a while. Just this year in Franklin County, we had deputies respond to an animal neglect run, found 2 emaciated dogs, another dog in a crate that was never allowed outside, ever allowed outside. All had feces and urine on them. A cat was in bad shape as well. And there was a 2-year-old and a 7-month-old who had been strapped in a car seat in a swing for days. They were also covered with urine and feces. The mother, father, and paternal grandparents were all arrested on that case. Next slide, please. This is the 3rd link, or the 5th link rather. This is hoarding. Animal hoarding creates a toxic environment that's detrimental to both people and animals due to the ammonia levels, feces, parasites, and widespread illnesses in the animals, which can coexist and create illnesses in people as well. There's almost 100% recidivism rate for hoarding cases on both item hoarding and animal hoarding. In my case, in my study from 2018 to 2020, the Kentucky animal hoarding cases made up just 12% of the animal abuse cases, but involved 72% of all the animals abused, because that's how many animals we find in hoarding cases, up to 500 in Kentucky involved in hoarding cases. An example would be in Graves County, where they responded on a complaint for child neglect and drug activity. Once again, substance abuse and child abuse hand in hand. The child said her parents do methamphetamine and fight a lot, and she didn't want to go home with them. The trooper found the house to be filthy and so cluttered it was hard to walk through, and the house had no running water. In a shed, the trooper found multiple dogs covered in feces and urine with no food or water. Next slide, please. This is physical abuse. Next slide, please. The FBI did a study, behavior analysis unit did a study in 2018 on animal cruelty offenders. This is the 6th link. And this study was the first to differentiate between 2 types of animal-directed aggression. One was effective offenders, which are primarily reactive, they're impulsive, they're characterized by anger, fear, they're more likely to beat, kick, or throw or choke animals. An example would be in Hardin County, where they responded to a domestic disturbance. The woman reported she was involved in an argument with her boyfriend that escalated when he threw her dog across the room. He then flipped the bed over on top of the dog and began beating the dog with a piece of wood that had broken off of the bed. And this is, once again, that was primarily reactive. He was moving his aggression from her to the animal. The other one is predatory offenders. They're cold-blooded. These are your serial killers. These are your sociopaths, etc. They're the ones that lack emotion, no empathy. They're more likely to shoot, stab, mutilate, torture, or burn animals. An example of a predatory in Kentucky would be in Callaway County. A man broke into his 77-year-old aunt's house, stabbed his girlfriend, who was his aunt's caretaker, multiple times. She ran outside and died in the driveway of a neighbor's property. He then slit his aunt's throat, killing her and strangling her dog before throwing the dog in the trash. If a predatory offender does feel emotion, it's usually excitement or a thrill for the acts that they're committing. Just recently in Bourbon County, a man sent videos of himself torturing his grandmother's cats. He told the officer he got such a rush from torturing them. It was a rush for him. Next slide, please. This is the 7th link. The FBI study showed that offenders who had children, lived with children, or had children present at the time of the offense had higher rates of arrest for child maltreatment. The 8th link. 60% of all offenders, 72% which were effective offenders, 49% were predatory, engaged in domestic violence prior, concurrent to, or following the cruelty offense. And that's one of the things I hear a lot of is, oh yeah, I know that link. They start with animals and then move on to people. Well, that's not what the FBI found. Like I said, They engaged in domestic violence prior, concurrent to, or following the cruelty offense. So in my mind, all they really do is just expand their victim list. In Jefferson County, for example, a woman allegedly tried to cut her 10-year-old special needs son's tongue out and then shot and killed him. This was Kyan Higgins Jr., that this whole thing with this bill that Kiera's trying to pass is about. Animal control and the police had investigated animal abuse at that house 24 times in the 18 months before her son died, and nobody thought to ask, do you have concerns for anybody else? And the neighbors did. The neighbors were on the news saying we should have known how she was treating her kids by how she treated her animals. But nobody thought to ask. An example would be in Jessamine County, another example, a man started throwing things and his girlfriend told her 2 children to run to another house and call the police. And what that says to me is this has happened before. This is a plan they have to get these children to safety. So the children ran to another house and called the police. He then punched his woman on the left side of her forehead with his fist, shoved her to the ground, and stomped on her chest. He grabbed her child's service dog, threw the dog into a TV, then picked it up again and drove off with it. And I have no information about what happened to that dog. Another one in Jefferson County, the dog's owner fled the perpetrator's home due to domestic violence and could not take the dog with her. The man then sent her 2 videos showing him physically abusing the dogs. The 8th link. I'm sorry. Next slide, please. All right, I already covered that. This is the 9th link. These are the 3 main contentions found in this FBI study. The 9th link is children who abuse animals are more likely to become violent towards humans. And I can also say that they're more likely to become violent towards animals as well. The 10th link, adults who abuse animals are more likely to commit interpersonal violence because it's all about abusing something. The 11th link, animal cruelty in the home typically indicates there's concurrent interpersonal violence and vice versa. For the social workers who go to these homes to look for, to do welfare checks, to continue to monitor how a situation is in that home, look for animal abuse as well, because they may have stopped, physically abusing the child or neglecting the child, but now they're doing it to the animal instead. For example, in Madison County, a grandmother witnessed her juvenile grandson kicking the dog in the side and the back. The rest of the family had heard the dog yelping and told KSP, Kentucky State Police, that he was abusive toward the dog, and he had already killed one dog by locking it into a car in the heat until it died of heat stroke. In Scott County, a juvenile grandson shot his grandfather several times in the face, hit his grandmother with the gun, causing her to fall. He then pointed the gun at her head and tried to fire it, but it misfired twice. So he beat her with it. Then that caused the gun to quit misfiring, and he shot the dog in the neck, and it bled to death. Next slide, please. These are the forms of child abuse. As you all know, I don't need to really tell you this, but all of these cause emotional abuse of the child. On a federal level, this neglect is the predominant one. Physical abuse is second. Sexual abuse is last. But there's certainly a percentage of children who are suffering from more than one type of abuse. It mirrors my study, as you can see on the black, the 13th link. It mirrors my study for animal abuse as well. So that's the 13th link. And then the 12th link is that domestic violence in the house and animal abuse in the house all cause emotional abuse in addition to the abuse that the child might be suffering firsthand. Witnessing animal abuse has been put forth as an adverse childhood event. It hasn't been successful yet, but there have been lawmakers that have been trying to put that forward. Children who are exposed to domestic violence are 3 times more likely to be cruel towards animals. So when you have a child that's witnessing domestic violence, you need to check on the animals as well, because they're 3 times more likely to be injured, because the child is basically, when the child is victimized or it's seeing domestic violence, it's all causing emotional abuse, and they are in return sometimes taking out their emotional trauma on the only thing in the house that's more vulnerable than they are. Okay, and it could be an animal. Emotional abuse, an example would be a small child told Somerset police she was watching a small dog for a friend. When she handed the dog to her father, he threw the dog against the wall, breaking 3 bones in the dog's leg. The child stated to police she only wanted her father to hold the dog for a second. Another example, in Russell County, a man beat the family cat to death with a baseball bat, then held a loaded rifle to the head of his girlfriend and 4-year-old son and struck his girlfriend in the face with his fist. Next slide, please. This is the 14th link. And 60 to 80% of families with history of child physical abuse who also have animals, once again, the animals are also being abused. 75% of animal abuse occurs in the presence of children, once again, causing emotional abuse. And again, the rate of dog bites in these homes is 11 times greater than in non-abusive homes because animals fight back. An example would be a man in Wayne County. A man beat his girlfriend on the way home, then strangled her, beat her again at the house. He threatened to kill her and her children if they called the police. He tried to kick the door of the room the kids were hiding in, tried to kick the door in, and then the dog bit him as a result of that. And he started beating on the dog at that point. So once again, it's all about power and control and preying on the vulnerable. Next slide, please. This is the 15th link. Over 71% of battered women report their batterers had harmed, killed, or threatened animals in order to coerce, control, and intimidate them. In fact, several studies of women in domestic violence shelters have shown women put off entering a shelter for fear of what will happen to their pets. As an example, I just gave you, where he started sending her videos of him hurting her dogs. This is a unique form of abuse to harm pets in order to exert control, prevent the partner from leaving, to coerce the victim to return, and it's often done in front of children. So basically, the more love the pet is to the victim, the more vulnerable that pet becomes for abuse. An example would be in Mercer County. A domestic survivor reported to the police that her boyfriend had assaulted her and all their animals over a period of 3 weeks. He took her phone, her car keys, told her that if she left without him, he would kill her. She had been strangled, slapped, and slung against the wall numerous times. The woman stated during the same time frame the boyfriend abused the dogs at the residence by taping their muzzles shut, once again, because animals fight back, then punching them, body slamming them onto the floor, and slinging them against the wall. Another example in Kentucky, a man stabbed his girlfriend in the neck and chest while she was sleeping. When she was at the hospital, she did survive it. When she was at the hospital, he broke into the home and killed her dog by drowning it. Next slide, please. Excuse me. This is the 16th link. These are the commonalities of abuse, physical abuse, with domestic abuse and child abuse and animal abuse, although it's not documented. Emotional abuse is the most common form of abuse. It's emotional abuse. The next most common form for domestic violence is physical. For child and animals, it's neglect. But you have bruises across the board, fractures across the board, head and neck injuries across the board, lacerations, scalds, burns, extremity injuries, particularly domestic violence survivors, because they put their arms up to block being hit in the face, and that causes injuries to the outside of the arms. You have abdominal injuries for child abuse. Animal abuse is front of the body. The majority of these victims were young adults, young children, particularly under the age of 1. Almost 50% of children killed from physical abuse were under the age of 1. The next highest levels were between 2 and 5. And that's because once they hit school, school becomes a safety net. And so they're less likely to die, although the physical abuse and neglect may certainly continue. And then with animals, it's also under the age of 1. And then across the board, the perpetrators are known to the victims. Next slide, please. This is senior abuse, and this is one of the things I always quote. An elder, this is from a humane officer that stated that elder and animal abuses go together so often that when I see one, I automatically look for the other. And that's what I want everybody to do on all of these abuses. Whether you're responding to animal abuse, whether you're responding to domestic violence, senior child abuse, always look for the other because it's probably going to be there. Adult Protective Service workers report that 35% of their senior clients reported pets being threatened, injured, killed, or denied care by a caretaker. And they may threaten to injure a pet in order to gain access to the victim's assets. They were reported seeing evidence of intentional abuse and neglect when visiting their clients. 75% know their clients' concerns for their pets cause them to refuse services or housing. Once again, just like domestic violence victims, they're more concerned about their animals than their own safety. And then 92% of adult protective service saw animal neglect coexisting with self-neglect. And when I teach police, I say, I am not telling you that you need to arrest a senior citizen that is neglecting their dog. It could be from some forms of a dementia. It could be because they are just barely surviving themselves and they need help. They all need help. And so that's the one thing I tell police is more than one may need help in the situation, and to expand your call for service to see who else might need help. There was an example in Boyd County. The sheriff deputies reported a man assaulted his grandmother and punched her cat in the face in an attempt to coerce her into calling his mother to give him money for drugs. He had assaulted his own mother the previous week. So once again, you've got substance abuse, animal abuse, and domestic violence hand in hand. Next slides, please. This is on sexual assault. Next slide, please. This is the 18th link. These are the commonalities in sexual assault between species. Understand that across the board, the majority of sexual assault victims do not have visible injuries. A lot of your adults say, do whatever you got to do, just don't kill me. Okay. And so there's not going to be any physical injuries as a result of that assault. With children, it's grooming. They don't want to hurt the child because they don't want the child to go crying and telling somebody about it. So it's all about grooming and being more gentle. Same with animals. Animals don't even have the safety nets even children have. And most of your child abuse goes unreported. You know, only about 30% of all child abuse is ever reported. So, or at least reported in a timely manner. And animals don't even have the safety nets children have. They don't go to the vet. They don't have family members coming on. They don't have any of those safety nets that children have. And even children, the abuse is critically underreported. So across the board, once again, the perpetrators are known to the victims. It's all deviant sexual behavior, all of it. And it's never the victim's fault. And I always give this example because I can't even tell you how many derby events. In fact, that's some of the PTSD I still have is from working derby events. But we had a case involving a male that was passed out in a restroom, and he had been multiply sexually abused. And when he was just that drunk, he was so drunk, he became a victim of sexual assault multiple times at this derby event. And, you know, just because he's drunk doesn't make it his fault. Just because somebody's hitchhiking, it doesn't mean that that's the proper penalty for hitchhiking or getting drunk or high or whatever. So it's never the victim's fault. Next slide, please. Child's other crimes associated with bestiality. There are child sexual abuse, which an example of a study showed the vast majority of adult males evaluated for sexual misconduct. Bestiality was the single largest risk factor predictor for increased probability of committing child sexual abuse because it's all deviant sexual conduct. It's also connected with domestic violence. It's connected with cruelty because they may cause an injury to the animal. Could be torture of a dog or cat because that's intentional injury that you also see with human victims of sexual assault, because they get a rush off of causing the person pain while they were sexually assaulting them. And then it's closely linked to pornography, with child porn, bestiality, or combination of both, crush videos, for example, and trespassing to gain access to an animal, usually on a farm. Now, the first law that was passed in bestiality law that was passed in Kentucky, it was legal to have sex with an animal until 2019 in Kentucky. And I went down to the Frankfurt and testified to the Senate Judiciary Committee for this bill that was passed that year. And one of the things that happened after the bill was passed was the first case, the first arrest made for this new sex crimes against animals law happened as a result of KSP doing search warrants on digital evidence on a child pornography case. They found when they were doing the search warrant on his digital devices that he had also videotaped himself having sex with his dog. And so once again, it's all deviant sexual conduct and it's all closely tied to all species. Next slide, please. So this is the 20th and last link that links them all together, and that's the abusive nature of the perpetrator. And I can't stress that enough. And that's what links everything together. That's why we have substance abuse. That's why we have, it's linked to animal abuse. That's linked to child abuse. That's linked to senior abuse. That's linked to domestic violence, because it's the abusive nature of the perpetrator. We too often focus on the species of the victim, and that's what our lawmakers are doing. Correct, Kiera? That's what they're doing. They're looking at the species of the victims instead of the abusive nature of the perpetrator. And that's what we should be focusing on, because we simply cannot separate animals from humans, although our laws and our procedures do. Next slide, please. So this is the first link law that was passed in Kentucky. I had nothing. No, I did. This is the one I wrote. I'm sorry. This is the one that I wrote. It was as a result of Kyan Higgins Jr.'s tragic death. I was so infuriated by it. I mean, I can't tell you how infuriated I was by it that I went to lawmakers and I, complained about it, and they asked me to help write this law. This ordinance is only specific to Louisville Metro, where Louisville Metro Police and Animal Control are required or mandated to attend 48 hours of training, 4 to 8 hours of training on the link, and incorporate the link in biannual domestic violence training, which are all required to, all law enforcement are required to do every 2 years in the state of Kentucky. So it has to be inserted into that. LMPD and Metro Animal Services have to expand the initial animal abuse call for service to determine if there's reasonable suspicion for interpersonal violence, and report suspicions to the appropriate agencies. Animal Services has to provide free of charge shelter for up to 30 days for pets belonging to victims of interpersonal violence, or to facilitate the adoption of the pet upon request. It requires both agencies to provide transportation of a pet to a safe location if requested. So if they are taking a victim, a survivor of domestic violence to a family member's house or another place of safety, they have to take her pet or his pet with them. Louisville Metro and Police and Animal Control have to create an informational brochure of government and community-based resources for the pets, because when you leave a domestic situation, your income and your resources immediately go down. So I wanted them to write this so they have resources for their pets, free food, low cost spay neuter, etc. And it makes it a civil offense of a penalty for up to $500 for anyone to knowingly commit an act of animal abuse in the presence of a child. This was the first law passed like this in the United States, mandating training and mandating and making it offense to commit animal abuse in the presence of the child. This was the first law passed like this in the United States. Next slide, please. This was the first link law, and this is the one I did not have anything to do with, and I applaud the person who has spent 10 years trying to get this passed. This includes coercion, violence against an animal when used as coercive conduct in the definition of domestic violence or dating violence and abuse. And it also allows a judge in both situations to award possession of a shared domestic animal to the petitioner. Yet at the same time, what we have a problem with is animals are not listed in domestic violence, lethality, or risk assessments. Now, I will say that Jefferson County Louisville Metro Police now have included animals in their domestic violence risk assessments. And if anybody wants a copy of one, to contact, you can contact me and I'll get it for you. Or you can contact Louisville Metro Police and they can share it with you. And the other problem is that animal control, as Kiara is trying to get changed, most law enforcement in Kentucky and social workers in Kentucky are not trained to look for the link. So that's one of the things that we're all trying to work together to change. Because when we create change, when we know what to look for, we know to look for it, we know what to look for, we know who to report it to, we can help protect more and more people. Next slide, please. And this was when this law passed that put animal violence in dating and domestic violence definitions. I went to the Chief Justice of Kentucky and I said, I want pets specifically mentioned on emergency protective order applications because they'd been in there. I mean, you could have listed under other, but nobody knew to list it under other. So I wanted them specifically listed. And he sent it to the administrative office of the courts. The next thing I know, I'm getting a call from the administrative office of the courts, and they're saying we're adding it to emergency protective order applications as we speak. So now it's in there, which I'm sure you all are aware of now. So that, I mean, you just had, and he didn't know who I was. I mean, he had no idea who I didn't even mention, I mentioned my name, that's it. But change can be created if we just know what to do, who to send it to, and work on getting it done. So next slide, please. This is the end of my presentation. Does anybody have any questions? And that's one of my dogs I've fostered and failed with.
Joy, thank you so much for bringing your expertise, bringing all of the research that you've compiled around this issue, and just really, really grateful for all of the wisdom and expertise. I know we've got a couple of questions that we've collected from the chat, and it looks like maybe we've got some questions for folks to unmute. So why don't we start with the hand that we've got raised, and then I can jump into the questions that were submitted in the chat after that. Dr. Curry, would you like to jump in?
Sure. Joy, I just want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for this presentation. It was incredibly well done, and it really helped bring evidence to the forefront to what we've seen in our child abuse program for decades now. And we've had asking about animal abuse on our family interview forms for years. Both to ask of verbal children and to also ask of non-offending caregivers if it's safe to ask. We would obviously never ask that in front of a potential perpetrator, but I love that you recognize that psychological maltreatment is by far the most common form of child maltreatment. And abuse of children and abuse of animals is often done as a way to terrorize another individual. So it can be a way to terrorize mom or dad by a perpetrator. Abuse of animals is a way to terrorize the child or the mom, whatever. And I want to be clear that I recognize that it's not always the male that's the perpetrator and the female that's the victim. But I just want to thank you for that. And I also just wanted to just draw some attention to the conversation around the concept of pets and children as property, rather than as living individual souls. So, I think that that is a cultural issue. And the final thing I wanted to just mention, sorry, I'm all over the place, but I'm trying to talk fast and not take up too much time, is, understandably and appropriately, from a child protective services standpoint, the goal is always reunification and family preservation. And in many cases, that is appropriate, and I agree with that. But I do think we still have a long way to go in learning how to distinguish between someone who has committed abuse because they have a lack of understanding, resources, impulse control, things that can be mitigated and treated and rehabbed, versus
Substance
perpetrators of
abuse.
abuse who are taking advantage of the vulnerable and who will every bit continue to do so if they're not locked away. And I think we grossly underestimate the number of our perpetrators who are in that second category, and we have a lot of work to do there. So thank you again.
Thank you, and I absolutely agree with you. I absolutely agree. And I also thank you so much for when safety starts with that first call. So when you ask, do you have concerns for anybody else? I want animal control to ask that question. I want law enforcement. I can't even get Metro Safe in Jefferson County to ask that question. They said they got too many questions to ask as it is. And, so it all safety starts with that first call. So thank you so much for doing that for so many years that you've done it. Thank you.
There's definitely work to do, right? Joy, there's a couple of questions that I wanted to make sure we had time for before we close out here. And I think you answered some of these, and we will be sending the PowerPoint out to folks, and the last few slides are the references that Joy has done a fantastic job of compiling. One of the questions that we had was, considering all the links between animal abuse and other types of violence, what interventions or policies are being introduced in Kentucky to help humans and pets? So I know you covered a couple of those. Is there anything else that you are aware of that's happening when it comes to policies or practices that people could be advocating for?
I'd like to see, well, number one, Kyan's law, the bill that will be coming up next session. I absolutely think that is important. The other thing I'd like to see is, when I report child abuse or domestic violence on online or through a phone call, I'd like to see that question on that being asked on those two forums. When you go online to the Kentucky, I can't even remember what it's called now, but it's the online reporting system for child and domestic violence. I'd like to see that question on there. Do you have concerns for anybody else, animals, whether it's, okay, so you're reporting child abuse. Do you have any concerns for any adults in that house? Do you have any concerns for any animals in that house? And, vice versa. I'd like to see that put in there. I'd also like to see mandated training for law enforcement in this. So the only place in Kentucky we have it is in Louisville Metro. I'd like to see it across state line. I've gone to DOCJT, or the Department of Criminal Justice Training. I've gotten shunned there. I've gone to the governor's office. I've gone to the attorney general's office. I mean, I don't mind going anywhere to try to get something that will help the vulnerable in the state. So, but the other thing I'd like to do is to see, and this isn't necessarily getting laws passed, but getting a closer working relationship between social services and law enforcement and potentially animal control. So, we had that with Crimes Against Children's Unit at Louisville Metro, but that I think isn't. I had a social worker partner, as a matter of fact, but I don't think we have that anymore due to so few police officers and so few social workers. But I would like to cross-reporting and cross-training is a big issue, and working together is a huge issue, because working together, we can get things done.
Thank you for that, Joy. I think there's a lot of opportunity to work across silos and work across, professions in order to help lift up the link here. I know for me, I have some things that I can walk away with as far as making sure that people understand the link between like all of the information that you provided, some of the risk factors there. I want to reiterate what you said at the beginning around animal abuse does not guarantee that child abuse is happening, but it should be a red flag for you to ask and consider the possibility there. And I think that's really important to reiterate. And again, appreciate Dr. Curry's remarks around understanding the difference between the types of behaviors that we're seeing from perpetrators of abuse and neglect, and just continuing to further understand that difference among what we see in our communities. There was a specific question around reporting suspected psychological abuse for further investigation. I don't know if we have anyone from the Department for Community-Based Services on who might want to respond to that in particular, or who has experience with reporting psychological abuse for further investigation. I think I know obviously we would call the DCBS hotline or leave an electronic report. But I don't know if there are specific things that you'd want to emphasize as you're making that report.
I can speak to our team's experience very quickly. We have seen over the past few years an increased likelihood that our psychological maltreatment reports will actually be screened in and investigated. It still is very inconsistent across the state because it's very judge and courtroom dependent how that is perceived and approached once it is brought court active. But one effort that we have made over probably the past 10 years is to include discussion of the psychological maltreatment component in our final documentation on cases of child abuse and neglect. Whether or not that is going to result in a changed outcome, we just want to have it documented and have it on the radars of the judges and the other people reading our reports. So we're working to raise awareness of that, and that, frankly, the poor outcomes from abuse and neglect are more to do with the psychological component of the maltreatment than it is with any broken bones or physical injuries that may heal.
Yeah, and as Joy mentioned, the power and control and the fear, right, that's coming from that is what creates that real lasting impact on our kids and families. So I know we are just about at time. Thank you so much, Joy, for bringing all of this knowledge. Kiera, thank you so much for your advocacy. Keep up the good work. We are here standing alongside, and we'll continue to help lift up the needed changes here in Frankfurt. Want to thank the Co-Steer for Kids Face It movement for hosting this Lunch and Learn today, and everyone for joining. Just as a reminder, we ask that you take a couple of minutes to complete the evaluation survey. Even if you're not getting CEUs, we still want your feedback. At the end of the survey, you'll be able to request a social work CEU or certificate of completion if you would like. The survey link will not be shared later, so please make sure you open it and complete it before you leave the meeting. And Debbie has dropped that in the chat already. Again, thank you all so much. We will have a recording of the event today, along with a PowerPoint slide sent in an email by the end of next week. And you'll see us in your inbox there. Joy, any last words before we?
One last thing. Did you include the handouts that I sent?
I'm looking for confirmation from Debbie.
Yes, we will include those. I have those. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you all so much. Go take care of yourselves. I know this is a lot of information and could be pretty heavy. Thank you all so much for being here, and we'll see you at the next event.